Welcome to the forum for candidates for the November 5th general election in Minnesota House District 34A. The forum is being recorded by QCTV for multiple showings. Thank you, QCTV. Editing is only authorized through official media reporting excerpts. Edited clips of candidate forums may not be used for partisan political purposes. Meet the Candidate forums are held without a live audience, and voters' questions were submitted online for the candidates. I'm Sandy Connor, the forum moderator, and a member of League of Women Voters, Anoka, Blaine, Coon Rapids area, the sponsor of this forum. I live in Minnesota House District 32B, so I can't vote for any of these candidates. The League of Women Voters does not support or oppose any political parties or candidates for office. I'm sure each candidate cares very much who you vote for, but the League does not. The League does hope that each of you will vote. The goal of our forums is to help citizens become informed voters. The candidates for Minnesota House District 34A are Danny Nadeau and Brian Rains. All candidates for this race were invited to participate in the forum. Candidate Brian Rains was unable to attend. However, he did submit written responses to the questions provided in advance and a closing statement. I will read them where appropriate. Welcome to Minnesota House District 34A candidate Danny Nadeau. In lieu of opening statements, we will begin with two questions which were provided to the candidate in advance. This will be followed by questions from the public which were submitted in advance. We will end with a closing statement from each candidate. For the first two questions, answers are limited to 90 seconds. Candidate Nadeau, what is your motivation to run for this office, and what experience or knowledge would help you to serve effectively?
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you. And I also want to thank the League for putting this on. It's unfortunate my friend Brian's not here to enjoy this together. After a short stint in construction, I've spent the majority of my career in public service, starting with as a township administrator. I worked in the Minnesota Legislature as a researcher. I worked for the Department of Commerce in the State Energy Office, and for the last 14 years in Hennepin County, working in a broad array of areas. And during that period of time, I had the ability to meet and work alongside some really good leaders. And good leaders to me are those people, they show up, they're engaged, they listen, they don't come to the meeting with a predetermined result. They engage in ways and take all input, and they're inclusive, and then they find that balance. They make those hard decisions that keep our cities working, keep our region functioning, keep our state moving in the right direction. And that's those are the skills that I was able to serve under for years. Those are the things that I try to bring to the legislature. Creating that space for people to bring those ideas forward and create common sense solutions to the situations that are focused today.
Thank you. I will now read the response that was provided by candidate Brian Rains to the question, what is your motivation to run for this office, and what experience or knowledge would help you to serve effectively? The short answer to why I chose to run for office is simply because I support humanity and freedom. The long answer is I chose to run because all of us saw what happened in Wisconsin when union rights to organize were stripped, when they got rid of prevailing wage, when the teachers' union was gutted, etc. The attacks then continued on to undermine the rights of women, the LGBTQ plus community, etc. We should not be living in an era, in a country, where individual rights and freedoms are being taken away. In my formative years, I served in the U.S. Navy. During my time in service, I traveled overseas, where I was able to observe and participate in a variety of societies and cultures. It gave me a broader view of life than if I had remained at home, and made me so grateful for what we have here in America. I want to preserve the freedoms that we currently have, and continue to improve upon them. In addition, I am a third-generation union member, a proud millwright, and I work for the Carpenters Union. I work with men and women of all backgrounds, collaborate with our contractor partners, have experience negotiating contracts, and so much more. However, the thing I am most proud of is the soft skills training I do teaching our members how to be professional union carpenters, including communication skills and healthy conflict resolution. All of these experiences are assets that will help me to serve effectively in House District 34A. And the second question is, what are your goals for the future of Minnesota House District 34A? I will read the response provided by candidate Brian Rains. Even as a middle-aged, my goals for Minnesota's future are to continue our economic growth and stability, to be a state where people can be who they are and who they want to be, to protect the rights of women, children, and families, and to continue to improve the social fabric of our state. And candidate Nadeau, what are your goals for the future of Minnesota House District 34A?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I think the biggest challenge that we face in the state is the divisiveness between the political parties, and I think part of this district, the strength of this district, is that everybody is willing to participate. And I've spent the last 2 years very honored to represent Champlin, Dayton, and Rogers, and listening and engaging with folks that represent all kinds of different industries. This is one of the fastest growing areas in Hennepin County. And, this is an area where when problems arise, people raise their hands and people step up and say, I'm willing to participate in school districts. I'm willing to participate in the PTO. This is an area that's always been very, very solution oriented. And, when you bring problems forward, people don't really do much. But when you start bringing solutions forward, that's when people start to take action. And that's what I think the biggest thing that this region and this area needs to bring to the legislature is those values and those characteristics that make this area so strong. And continue to work on, the issues that all of Minnesota faces.
Thank you, candidate Nadeau. I will now ask the candidate to respond to questions submitted by the public. Responses are limited to 1 minute. What is working well in Minnesota House District 34A, and how would you support and strengthen those things?
There's so many things that work well. There's, unlike national politics, there's still trust that exists between citizens, between local government. Local government is very focused on the needs of those communities. They work together as a unit and working with me, trying to get capital investment dollars into these areas. They work hard together to try to get Hennepin County to come to the table with some of the challenges that that we face in Northwest Hennepin County. Wright County is just over the border. It's very, very different from our district, and so is east of us. So we're kind of this. It's not an island, but we have different needs. And part of the reason that one of the things that I started down at the legislature was a Suburban Solutions Caucus that is solely focused on those issues that suburbs face.
Thank you. Having started on a positive note, we will now ask, what areas for improvement are there in Minnesota House District 34A, and how would you work to improve them? It's hard to pull out one district in that question, to be honest. I think that suburbs,
you know, the divisiveness at the Capitol and in national politics, it's not just between Republicans and Democrats. It's also sometimes between Greater Minnesota and the Metro. And then now the suburbs are also another factor in there. So I think the needs of the suburbs in our district are different than maybe the needs in more metro areas, and different than Greater Minnesota. So I think that our strength in being down at the legislature is to try to push back, as much as possible on this one-size-fits-all ideology that has a tendency to, permeate the discussion today.
Thank you. What is the most urgent challenge Minnesota House District 34A is facing today, and how would you address that challenge?
The most urgent challenge in the district is probably the extensive growth. We are, as I mentioned before, we are the fastest growing community in Hennepin County, Rogers, Dayton, and Champlin. That's going to put pressure on school districts. It puts pressure on our transportation system. It requires additional investments that need to be made. We need to look long term at what those decisions are. We need to bring more people to the table. We need to bring the county to the table. We need to ensure that the legislature is understanding, of what those challenges are that we face. And with the educational component, right now I think that our cities are working, quite closely with local school districts, but we need to do a better job of planning longitudinally.
Thank you. What goal for Minnesota House District 34A would you put at the top of your list, and how could this goal be achieved?
Grace. I'll put grace at the top of the list. We're at a point today where neighbors and family struggle to be able to have conversations with one another because politics has a tendency to permeate too many things. I would submit that the biggest challenge that this district, that this state, that this region faces is recognizing that we don't agree on every issue, and we don't need to agree on every issue, but we do need to be able to continue to contribute to the conversation and do it in a respectful way.
Thank you. How would you make yourself available to hear the concerns of citizens of House District 34A?
I work hard to try to get input. Once again, because politics is a little divisive today, some people are a little bit more apprehensive to meet. But I've got one coming up on the 21st of September, if anyone's listening and wants to come. But I do open houses. I do listening sessions. I think I've done 16, 17 of those in the last 2 years. I will knock on 10,000 doors this election cycle, and I do it personally. I don't have volunteers I don't ask volunteers to come and do it. I think it's a way for me to connect in a real way with people, so that they can see me and we can have those hard discussions. We always need to create wider platforms for people to engage, both on a personal basis, also in surveys, using social media, and any other platform that we can possibly find.
How would you work with other legislatures to bring in funding for projects that benefit Minnesota House District 34A?
That's the key. You have to build relationships. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, I mean, that's one of the strengths of good leaders is compromise has somehow become a bad word in today's world, but it's in the world of politics, and it's not. And you have to build those relationships. We have to build trust back into our system between citizens, legislators, and between legislators themselves. I think the strength of Minnesota in the past has been our ability to actually find ways to get past those barriers. I'm super hopeful that in the future that we're going to be able to, put some of these impasses, kind of aside, and stand shoulder to shoulder on those areas where we do find common ground, recognizing that we're not always going to agree on every issue, but when we do find that common ground, we need to work together.
Should Minnesota be funding any projects that are not included in the current budget, particularly as this relates to Minnesota House District 34A?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Should we not in what budget? Whose budget?
Minnesota. Should Minnesota be funding, so I would imagine the state budget.
Well, the state budget, if I understand the question correctly, the state budget is crafted every 2 years. So we're towards the end of our budget that we passed in 2023. There will be a new budget that's put forward in 2024, and I think it's incumbent upon legislators and local elected officials to work together to ensure that the projects that this district needs are supported and put in every budget.
Do you support a Minnesota Equal Rights Amendment?
Minnesota currently has, and we were one of the first states to adopt the Equal Rights Amendment. And there was a bill this year that tried to modify that Equal Rights Amendment. It carved out age and it carved out religious exemptions. Initially, those were put back in. The governor did sign those religious exemptions back in, and that was when, and I think that's a success story where, both parties came together to get those religious exemptions and those age exemptions back in the ERA proposal.
How can Minnesota be an environmentally friendly state?
I think Minnesota is an environmentally friendly state. This is, it goes towards. I think that we have to remember there's this balance, and I'll use mining as an example. Up in and around the Boundary Waters Canoe Area watershed, there's big initiatives to do nickel mining up there, and there's strong opposition to that. Minnesota has some of the most environmentally stringent regulations in the country, and I happen to be one of those people that believes that, we have to trust government, that the people that we employ, the rules that we put in place, the legislation and laws that we put there, so that we're not only utilizing and managing our natural resources, but we're also preserving those natural resources.
Thank you. Will you support Minnesota legislation to modernize the funding sources for local community media stations like QCTV station here, and allow cities to retain local control of rights of way and ensure that all providers pay their fair share?
There was a lot in that question. Let me start with I was a big supporter of AMPERS. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Making sure that local stations have adequate revenues to ensure communications with their residents. The second half of the question was having to do with municipal rights of way. Is that what that was?
Allow cities to retain local control of rights of way and ensure that all providers pay their fair share.
I'm not quite sure how that yes on the, local government has the mandate to maintain and control their rights of way. I don't know how that would be removed. And as far as people paying their fair share, having to do with rights of way, I'm sorry, I don't understand how that question goes together. My apologies.
Thank you. How would you work with other House members to pass legislation that you support? What means would you use?
Oh, yeah. I'll give an example. I was in the minority in the last session, and politics play a role, and that's absolutely the course, and it should be. We should fight hard for those positions we believe in. But I think you have to find that common ground, and you have to build those. As I mentioned earlier, you build those relationships based on trust, and you're honest with people. One of the bills that I was able to work on is a scope of practice bill. has to do with medical practice, nurses, optometrists, things like that. And once you establish a relationship with legislators, it can be Greater Minnesota legislators in your own party that really don't have a lot in common with you, and or members from the other side of the aisle. You establish those trust-based relationships, and you can actually get things done.
That leads into the next question. Which one issue do you think is most important to work on with legislators across the aisle?
There is not one issue. I think we need to work on every issue that we possibly can find where there is common ground. We'll take education, for example. Last session we had a pretty big education bill. It was $2.2 billion. It was the largest investment in education that the legislature had ever made in a biennium. And our side of the aisle had a similar bill, same dollars. Our bill basically provided more flexible funding for schools, recognizing that the needs, for example, in Traverse County or Anoka Hennepin or ISD1 in Minneapolis, those needs are very, very different. And so our bill didn't pass, which is fine, but it gave us the platform to be able to have stronger conversations, so that I think moving forward, we're going to be able to work in more collaborative process.
And this ties into something you said earlier. What do you believe to be the key elements of compromise?
Being able to manage your ego, I think, is probably the biggest one. Harry Truman, was a guy that made a lot of hard decisions in a short period of time, but he not only did on his desk, the buck stops here, but he also had this strong belief that he didn't care who got credit. And I think that is probably the most important thing, is recognizing that we are all down there. Yep, we're representing our districts, but we're also making decisions that affect the whole state. And we need to have that grace. We need to set our egos aside. We need to work with one another. We need to look at areas where we can compromise, where we can find common ground, and focus on those things.
How would you handle pressure from interest groups?
I don't know if interest groups put pressure on legislators. I've never experienced that. I mean, interest groups, and when I'll use interest groups, advocates, industry, they're driving an agenda, and it's not a bad agenda. It's about recognizing learning. When I mentioned earlier about what I think good leaders are, good leaders, they listen and they engage. We don't come into the room with thinking we have all the answers. And so it's about working alongside people. It's not just people who oppose us from the other party, but it's also working alongside industry, and government has a real role in order to facilitate that. And invite industry, invite advocates, invite special interest to the table to see how we can create better solutions.
Thank you. What is working well in Minnesota, and how would you support and strengthen those things?
There's so many things that work well in Minnesota, and there's things that don't. I believe that politics gets in the way of. I think politics gets in the way of progress sometimes. We have these ideologies that come on, that the parties will drive on both sides. And oftentimes, they don't have the best interests of our citizens in mind. They have power in mind. They have politics in mind. And so I think that, once again, it has to do with people setting aside those preconceptions of, what a Republican is, what a Democrat is, who's on the top of the ticket, who's the loudest, and really settle down and start working hard on those issues that matter in their own districts and to the state at large.
What goal for Minnesota's future would you put at the top of your list, and how could this goal be achieved?
I would love it if Minnesota was back at the top when it came to education. And it wasn't that long ago that Minnesota and Massachusetts competed. We were at the top. It was always one or two. Today, our education, our K-12 education system is in the middle of the road. And there's been a lot of changes that have occurred in that time, but I would love to see us have the most excellent academic program in the nation. And how do we get there? And I think that we get there by recognizing, once again, that the needs in greater Minnesota are different than the metro, and that we start talking about and redesigning the education delivery system in Minnesota. And I think that's where we start. If we stay focused on that purpose, recognize that the provisional components are going to come next, I think we can get there.
How would you prioritize items for state spending?
You know, I think that first and foremost, I think that a society should be judged by the way it treats its most vulnerable. Our young, our old, people with disabilities. I work in the disabilities arena in my day job. I focus almost exclusively in the legislature on what I consider to be government infrastructure, and that is reimbursement rates, making sure our healthcare system is not only accessible, but it's also affordable, recognizing that we have different payer mixes, understanding that as we build more people into our public programs, that those public programs need to be paid for. So I think that, that along with the fact that we have, for the first time ever, we have more senior citizens, people over the age of 65, than we do under the age of 5. We have an aging population, and we need to start looking long-term at how we're going to address some of these bigger issues.
Thank you. Is Minnesota currently funding any projects that you think should be discontinued?
I think there's all kinds of them, without nitpicking. I think the focus should be evaluation. We should evaluate every program that's out there, be it a rapid rehousing program, be it a transitional housing program, be it our shelters, be it food, our food supports. I think we need to do a better job of measuring the effectiveness of those interventions. And determining whether or not families are better off. We, the legislature, we spent a lot of money in the last 2 years. We increased our budget by 40%. We spent $18 billion in surplus. We raised $10 billion in taxes. Minnesotans are generous people. We don't want to see anyone suffer. But at the same time, we have to balance that with safeguarding taxpayers.
And close to that, how would you make decisions on new budget items that are proposed?
That's a very vague question. The governor puts together a budget, and then the legislature basically comments, looks at that budget, takes some other issues in on its own. If I were in charge of the legislature, I think I would create more of a budgeting task force that basically brings people together before we start hearing individual bills, so that we can establish, the legislature calls them targets, they're spending targets. I think we should focus far more on those policy implications. What is our intent with those, with those dollars? What are we trying to accomplish? And I think if we did that, I think it would make the budgeting process a little easier.
Thank you. Now this is to end with kind of a fun question. If you had all the money, authority, and resources you needed, what one thing would you do to make life in Minnesota House District 34A better?
If I had all the money, I I don't know. The lifestyle that we have in this district is good. I'm grateful for where I live, and I think most people that I talk to at doors are very grateful. I think that what I would do is I would focus on ensuring that once again we're protecting our region's most vulnerable. I would start looking at, what is the future delivery of our healthcare system, of our transportation system, of our education system. I would start looking at those longitudinal things, recognizing that the needs have changed over the years and they're going to continue to change, and put those policies in place that allow that to happen in a gracious way.
Thank you, Candidate Nadeau, for responding to our questions. We will now move to closing statements, and I will read the closing statement that was submitted by candidate Brian Rains. Even as a middle-aged white guy, I look forward to being an ally to the many groups that make up our great state. I firmly believe that there is more that unites us than divides us. I am not interested in division, but in commonalities. I want to know your kitchen table issues and what I can reasonably do through the state legislature to alleviate them. I am a strong supporter of women. I trust women to decide what is best for them, their bodies, and their families. You do not need men making those decisions for you. I'm here to help, not hinder. Collaboration is key. Last, I sincerely hope you vote. It doesn't have to be for me, but it is your American right to vote, to make your voice heard. There are those who want to take that voice away from you. You have the right to make a choice, to root for someone who listens to you and shares your values, and I encourage you to do so. And Candidate Nadeau will now have 1 minute for a closing statement.
Thank you, Sandy, for doing this, and thank you again, the League of Women Voters, for allowing me to come on. I want to thank the people of Senate District 34 or 34A for trusting me to go down and represent their interests in the legislature. And I say this often, but there's no single person, there's no party, there's no community that singly have all of the answers. And it's a statement, but it's also an authentic way that I live. And I think that's the strength and character of our district. We are accepting, we're open, we're inclusive, we're problem solvers, we're critical thinkers. And I just want to thank the residents of Champlin, Dayton, and Rogers for putting their trust in me.
Thank you, Candidate Nadeau. League of Women Voters thanks the candidates for speaking to voters about issues and for running for Minnesota House District 34A. Thanks viewers and those who submitted questions. Links to all our forums are located at lwvabcmn.org. The general election is November 5th. Early voting starts on Friday, September 20th. Many cities offer early voting. Check the website for your city or contact the Anoka County Elections Office in the city of Anoka. You can register to vote, update your registration, find information on voting options, and find your polling place online at mnvotes.org or the Minnesota Secretary of State's website. You can register or update your registration at your polling place on Election Day. The Minnesota Secretary of State's website will tell you what documents to bring. If you're interested in League of Women Voters, visit our website at lwvabcmn.org. Women and men aged 16 and older are welcome to join. Your vote is your voice. Make your voice heard by voting in the general election.